So, Jean-Paul, thank you very much for getting me to Verbier. It's quite a pleasure. It's actually the first time that I'm coming to Verbier. And today I try to give you some insights, both from environmental science and intermingled a little bit with the kind of the photography that I like to do, certainly heavily inspired by my professional work. So we're talking about resource hungry, and my idea for this presentation is closing the circle, basically. So closing the circle, I hope that by the end of this presentation you do understand a little bit better what's going on here in Verbier and how all this is linked with Michelangelo's David and also like to the CO2 in the atmosphere. So I want to start talking a little bit about the photography that I like to do. So what we see here in these three photographs, that's the sea in the mist close to Venice. And I call this movement 1, movement 2, movement 3. And what I like with this kind of photography is it's always the same material, so it's water, and it's water that is basically shaped by the action of the wind. So it's the texture that is changing all the time. And I'm very much interested in like transitions. So whenever I take photos in nature mostly, I'm very much interested in transition. So this is such an example, a kind of a sequence of the marine texture. And whenever you are lucky and you are on the beach and you see the interaction between the surf or the water and the sand, what you see here is this kind of interplay between like white sand and dark sand, and you get new drawings all the time. And again, it's the same material and it's the physical action of the water now that is doing the drawing. Again, these are transitions. Another transition that I'm very much interested in is like, for instance, the snow. And again, today is a good day here in Verbier to contemplate the snow. And the snow, again, it's like, it's a very interesting material. It's water, it's frozen water. And so this photograph that we're looking at here, it's called l'instant, because it's just changing. It has been out there just for like seconds or minutes. So again, it's a transition. So I can move this further now from the snow to the ice. And we're going to talk quite a little bit about glaciers here. Soon you're also going to understand why. So this is a photograph that I called écriture automatique. And again, what you see here, that has the physical size of something like 1 meter to 1 meter. This is basically dust on the glacier. And whenever the dust absorbs energy or heat, the ice starts to melt, and we have this pattern forming. And these patterns are just amazing. And again, this is a transition in time, it's a transition in space, it's changing all the time, and it results again from the physical action of the heat, and then as the melting of the ice, and everything starts to flow. Ice on glaciers form spectacular sculptures, beautiful as they can be, very organic, and again, a transition. As we move then from these small scale patterns that form in the snow or that form in the ice, as we move away from these ones to the larger picture. And here the larger picture is the glacier. So glaciers, or the ice of the glacier, can form spectacular sculptures that again, they are there for like hours and days, and with the action of the glacier, these sculptures, they form completely. Or be it like just like in spring in the high mountains, a melting pond, right? So a melting pond is also changing, and these are major transitions again, formed by the physical action of heat, of solar radiation, etc. So nature, and especially like the high mountains, they are full of superb moments when you can see nature at action. So transitions. Our life is full of transitions, and very often it's really hard to capture these transitions with the naked eye. because they are so ubiquitous and they are just ephemeral in time. It's really, really easy to miss them. The existence is basically a long or an endless sequence of transitions, and sometimes we just take them for granted, and sometimes we're not aware that even the mountains, we are surrounded here by some of the most beautiful mountains in Verbier, and even the mountains, they are transitions, right? So it takes like geological ages for the mountains to become eroded, to change, etc., etc. And it's only now since like 60 years, or perhaps 100 years, or even 150 years, that we have entered the new epoch of the Anthropocene. So what is the Anthropocene? The Anthropocene is understood as a new epoch in geological time where for the first time it's the human activity that took over. It's the human activities that are now shaping our environment. It's not the geology anymore, it's us humans. And this is actually something extremely dramatic. And let me guide you now through a couple of examples, which I would call the epitome of the Anthropocene, and that's basically the deconstruction of a mountain, right? And the deconstruction of a mountain can be observed in Carrara, for instance, and let me take you now to the marble quarries in Carrara. And what humans have been doing there over the last 2,000 years is really spectacular, right? So they are basically taking down block by block, each of these blocks of marble up to 30 tons or even more. We are taking down block by block entire mountains there. And this is, for me, a major footprint of the Anthropocene. And as I walk you now through some of these pictures there, you can see how we have been able to change the mountains at the very, very large scale here, right? There's one picture, for instance, which I call the wired mountain, right? You see this top of a mountain, and then it's completely wired. It's a fully engineered mountain with a whole set of instruments around it to basically break it down. And this is something that is happening. The good thing now is that in Carrara, the overall topography of the mountains cannot be changed anymore. What we do is we go deep into the ground, hundreds of meters, block by block by block. We kind of unearth the marble from these mountains. And all this at the end, because humans, as humans, we try to reinvent ourselves. As humans, we try to rejuvenate ourselves all the time by kind of creating new sculptures, for instance. And this is this is certainly nothing new. So what we see here are the Tre Grazie, and what we see here is Michelangelo's David again. So these basically are the examples of excellence for beauty, for mirth, and for elegance, for instance, as really encapsulated by the Tre Grazie. On the other hand, for the Michelangelo, for David, by Michelangelo, what we see here again, it's like it's use, and it's the kind of the bravery and its strength. All again, we try to reinvent ourselves, we try to rejuvenate ourselves. And a goal of my presentation here is, for instance, to really close the circle. And so one of the questions that I'm asking here, what is the relationship between the old famous German biologist of the name of Ernst Haeckel on the one hand and Givenchy on the other hand? So Ernst Haeckel has been an expert in the biology and in the evolution of small animals, as we see them here on that slide. So these are animals that we call foraminifers and diatoms, for instance. These are almost microscopical animals, and they rule the carbon cycle in the ocean, right? These are the small animals. As they die, they sink down, they form the sediments of the ocean, And then over millions of years, based on the pressure and based on the heat, these animals at the end, they form the marble that today we excavate in Carrara. So the marble in Carrara and elsewhere is nothing else than the crusts of microscopical animals that once lived millions of years ago in the world oceans, right? And that's the beauty of all this. Again, this is a transition. It's a transition over millions of years, and yet it is a transition. It's the same material, right? But the material is morphing from one state to the other state, from one shape to the other shape. And now coming to Givenchy, so what we see here is like, for instance, an inspiration of jewelry based on the work that Ernst Haeckel did, right? So this is an inspiration from nature. And it is also reminiscent of a mask that, owing to the COVID-19, many of us, we wear today. At the end, it's all connected, right? And again, to come back to Ernst Haeckel, all these little foraminifers and diatoms that once lived in the ocean, and still today they live in the ocean, these are, or among others, the main drivers of our climate of today, right? Because these are the ones that absorb lots of CO2 from the atmosphere, right? And thereby they kind of drive, to some extent, the climate of our planet. I've been talking a little bit about the Anthropocene. I would like to open a kind of a parenthesis here and briefly take us to the antipode. Who does a better job than us humans? This is the example of the antipode that I would like to kind of share with you today. This is the giant anteater. The giant anteater is a fabulous animal, and the primary resource of the giant anteater are termites and ants. And what you see in the background is like a huge termite mound, and the anteater is able to kind of forage or is able to eat the termites or the ants living within these mounds. The anteater, as I said, is a fantastic animal. The anteater has like a tongue that is something like 1/2 meter long. The anteater eats up to 30 to 40,000 termites or ants per day. And it is exactly with this specialized tongue that the anteater can deploy up to 150 times per minute into a mound of the termites to get the termites out. So why is that animal so smart? That animal literally per day walks from one termite mound to the other, and after a certain time foraging on the termites in there, evolution until now has been such that the termites start attacking the anteater. So the anteater is forced to leave that termite mound and then recovers from the termite attack and then walks to the next termite mound. So what is so beautiful with this? Thereby the anteater never depletes or never destroys a resource at once. As the anteater leaves the mound, walks to the next one, the mound that he foraged on can recover from the foraging, right? So therefore we call the anteater a prudent predator, right? A prudent predator that does not deplete its resource. And this is definitely not what we do, right? We humans, we are not prudent predators. We humans, we are rather subjugating predators. We are kind of subduing Earth, right? And so that's completely different from what nature basically does. And still we have the hope that we're able to escape evolution. But unfortunately, it looks like we are not able to really escape evolution here. So let's get back for a moment to the Anthropocene. And we are living in a changing world. We are living in a rapidly vanishing world. And again, if I can bring up an epitome for vanishing world, let's have a look at the glaciers. So glaciers worldwide, mountain glaciers, but then also the polar ice caps. they are vanishing today at an unprecedented pace. And here is a picture of the Rhone Glacier. So what I like a lot with the picture of the Rhone Glacier is, since decades, there's an ice cave, and this ice cave is being covered with white sheeting to protect that ice cave from melting. So when I was up there, there was a big thunderstorm approaching, and people were literally seeking shelter in that ice cave, right? And for me, that's quite interesting. On the one hand, we are destroying the glaciers because we are changing the climate, right? On the other hand, when the weather is such that we cannot be out there again, then we seek shelter, basically in what we are about to destroy. So let me take you now briefly to what I do professionally. So we are trying to understand the impacts of the climate change on the hidden life in the streams that literally drain the roof of our planet, right? These are so-called glacier-fed streams. And part of my team, they have the privilege to travel around the world, month by month by month, and to see the most spectacular sceneries with glaciers and with the streams that they nurture. So they take samples there, and they ship the samples back to Switzerland, and then we do quite some analysis on these samples, like for instance to basically uncover the microbial life that is dwelling in these glacier-fed streams. And this is really the unseen life. You don't see microbes, and yet they are there. There are thousands of microbial species in there. There are millions and millions and millions of cells in the sediments of these streams, and yet we don't see them. And they are so important for the life in these ecosystems. They are so important for all the services that these ecosystems provide for our human well-being. Foremost amongst them is probably the clean water, the water that we use to drink, for instance, or the water that we use to irrigate the fields, etc. So what we see here is what we call a bacterial tree. And so what we found basically until now is that there are not a couple of bacterial species that may be endangered because the glaciers are shrinking owing to climate change, but there are hundreds and if not thousands of different microbial groups. And they are disappearing now. They are just disappearing as we speak because the glaciers are melting. So this is the unseen loss of biodiversity in the Anthropocene. There are also signatures that you can even see from space. So signatures of the Anthropocene. A major signature of the Anthropocene is, for instance, the deforestation, right? So we are deforesting the lung of our Earth, basically, right? This here is an example of massive deforestation in Indonesia, but there's massive deforestation going all around the world. It's not only the deforestation, but it's also like the biodiversity loss. And again, we are very hungry for resources. And we dare entering the rainforests all around the world. We dare taking out new resources, be it like timber, for instance, or like food resources, like animals, right? And we kind of market these animals, we eat these animals. And we all are aware of this by now, given the COVID-19, that this has been at the very, very basis of the COVID-19 pandemic as we have it now. It has also been at the very basis of the Ebola, and it is at the basis of the HIV, so that is causing AIDS. So all these viruses, they do come out from the rainforest, right? And it's because of the globalization, etc., that we're just spreading them all around the world. So, and this is causing the COVID-19 pandemic. Being resource hungry, this brings me back to the Givenchy jewelry and the mask. And what we are seeing here, so this is a kind of a screenshot from the Johns Hopkins University homepage where you can download on a daily basis at least, the COVID-19 numbers all around the world, they are increasing, and we are, again, we caused, it's us humans that caused this pandemic, right? So now, I tried to close the circle here a little bit. I was talking a little bit about like the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Now, having had, or we are in the midst of this pandemic, as I speak, if there's something good with this pandemic, it does shows us that as we are using our habits, it's the overall CO2 concentration in the atmosphere is slowly decreasing, right? So this is a good sign, if I may, right? So the CO2 is decreasing in the atmosphere. That may be beneficial for the climate if, once we are behind that pandemic, if we are able to keep that CO2 level in the atmosphere a little bit lower. And that's, again, it's in our hands, so let's really work towards that. Now, bringing the circle to Verbier, what we see here, these are like two maps basically. On the left hand, we see a map of Verbier from around the 30s. And so that's basically before the industrialization in the Valais really took part. And then on the right hand, that's the same map with all the numerous chalets and hotels as we have them today in Verbier. So this as well, this is a kind of a sign of the acceleration. There's acceleration all around. So we're accelerating the land use change, and by accelerating the land use change, we do contribute to the Anthropocene. This here is a series of maps from within Switzerland, and there is like a number 3, that's Verbier, where we are today. So what this map tries to show us is the felt vulnerability of the landscape within Switzerland. So let me explain briefly. It's the upper left panel that shows us how people living in the various regions within Switzerland feel how the snowpack during winter may affect the vulnerability. So here we see, going to number 3, that Verbier is doing well. It's snowing as I speak here. So we are doing well with snow here, for instance, during winter. However, as you move towards the right panel, that's like, again, it's the felt vulnerability as people living there, as they see how the thawing of the permafrost is affecting the vulnerability. And here we're not doing not well. And then as you move to the third panel, for instance, that one is showing us the loss of the glaciers, right? So the shrinking of the glaciers. And again, here in Verbier, for instance, we're not doing well. So glaciers are vanishing, the permafrost is thawing, and along with the thawing permafrost, there's an increasing risk for natural hazards, for instance, like landslides, etc. And all this is increasing the vulnerability as seen by the people living in Verbier, or living in Sillon, or living in Zermatt, etc. Right? So again, this is, as I said, we are living in the Anthropocene, we are part of the Anthropocene. As we go outside, we live, we feel the Anthropocene. And with this, I hope that the circle is closed.